I'm Joanne Dodson. I'd like to welcome everyone here to the Spring Public Health Conference. This conference is intended to help support the maternal child health in the state by working with our WIC programs and with our public health programs. One of the issues that has been of real importance in our state for a number of years is the issue of autism and the importance of developmental screening. We have at present some legislation in place that's going to improve access to autism services for families by having insurance cover autism. We were very pleased to a few months ago to have a presentation by Dr. Georgina Peacock by audio conference to our region. And Dr. Peacock is from CDC and did a presentation on autism and the Act Early campaign from CDC. And after hearing her, we were very impressed, and I called and asked if she would be willing to come to Montana to reprise her presentation here for us at our Spring Public Health Conference. And I'm pleased to say that she agreed to do so and is here with us today. Dr. Georgina Peacock is a developmental behavioral pediatrician. She is presently the medical officer and senior service fellow with the Prevention Resource Center branch at CDC, and that's in the birth defects and developmental disabilities. Dr. Peacock is aware of and familiar with wide open spaces. She took her medical degree and master's in public health from the University of Kansas, and she did her pediatric residency and fellowship in developmental behavior pediatrics from the University of Kansas, and has a Bachelor of Science in German and cell and molecular biology from the University of Michigan. We're really pleased to have Dr. Peacock here with us today and to talk with us about what we as public health can do and about the Act Early campaign. So, Dr. Peacock.
German was a long time ago, so I can say Dankeschön, and that's about it. So I'm delighted to be here in Montana today. I got to fly in and I saw some snow. We don't see snow in Atlanta anymore. In fact, we got 1 inch of snow, I think in January. They closed down all the schools. Nobody had school, and that was our snow day, and that's the only snow that we've seen. But I did see snow in Kansas, and yes, I had been on little planes flying out to western Kansas, seeing children, diagnosing children with autism, and really understand that, you know, things are different when you're not in a big city, and there are different things that you can do. There are different opportunities that you have when you get to go into rural areas and places where there aren't resources. I think sometimes people are much more creative when the resources aren't as readily available. I'm delighted to be here because I get to talk to you about my favorite subject, which is child development. And it's my favorite subject on many levels. You know, as a mom of 4, I get to watch my children grow, and I watch what they do, and I am delighted in the milestones that they meet. I worry when they're not meeting the milestones that I would expect them to meet. And I remember with child development when something is frustrating with a child, such as my 3-year-old who won't put on any of her clothes, I can remember that's a milestone. You know, she's supposed to say, I do it all by myself. And so, you know, what I'm hoping to do today is to talk to you about child development, talk to you about early warning signs of delay, and what to do if we have concerns. I brought one of my favorite children's books, The Places You'll Go, and I'm sure many of you have read this. And what this reminds me of is that, you know, we all have dreams for our children. We all are on a certain path, and things happen that we don't expect. There are obstacles that may come in our way, but what we need to do as families and as public health professionals and as pediatricians and everybody in the community, we need to support those families through troubling times, celebrate the achievements, and help every child reach their full potential. Like we heard from Mr. Stops, don't ever stop. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get identify children early and get them where they need to go so that we can help them reach their full potential. So I am going to talk to you about milestones. I'm going to talk to you about early warning signs, some of the resources out there, and then some of the things that we're doing at the CDC to help support you all on the front lines as far as awareness goes and as far as building capacity in states to help identify children early and get them into services early. So what is development? Well, you know that when parents go to the doctor, what we focus on a lot is how much they weigh, how tall they are. That's what parents talk about. They come home from their well-child visit and they say, oh, you know, my child's in the 50th percentile or whatever that might be. And what we're trying to do with our campaign is to help parents understand there are other things to pay attention to. There are other milestones that all children should meet, and if they're not meeting that we need to figure out what's going on. So we do this by observing children and how they play, learn, speak, and act. And I think we look at different developmental areas. We look at the social domain. We look at communication, cognitive, so those are, you know, learning, problem solving, gross motor and fine motor, how they crawl up on things, how they walk and run, and then how they use scissors or how they pick up a Cheerio off the table, and then those adaptive skills. So how can they dress themselves, brush their teeth, eat food, go to the bathroom, all of those kind of things. And so when I'm seeing a child and a parent is concerned, those are the different areas of development I'm looking at. And if we teach parents how to monitor milestones, then they can become aware when their child isn't meeting the milestones that they would expect. We have to remember that as children grow, some children are going to meet milestones a little bit early, some are going to reach them a little late. So these are not absolutes because we know development sort of occurs over time, but the milestones I'm going to share with you are sort of the time at which, if this isn't happening, that we really need to figure out what's going on. So just a couple definitions. A developmental delay is just merely when a child is not reaching a milestone or a number of milestones late. And then autism spectrum disorders, which is what I focus most of my time on, are a group of disorders where there's problems with socialization, problems with communication, and then unusual behaviors. And these are present before the age of 3. And even though they are present before the age of 3, and we have documented this by going through medical records and looking at when parents had concern, and I'm sure many of you who are out seeing families and children, parents say, you know, I just felt like there wasn't something quite right. Even though that's happening really early, the average age of diagnosis is still around 5 years of age in this country for an autism spectrum disorder. And so there's a big gap between what parents are telling us and you know, when children are actually getting diagnosed. So that is why Congress said, you know, we need you to increase awareness about autism, we need you to increase awareness about child development, about other developmental disabilities, and so that from that, in 2004, we launched the Learn the Signs Act Early campaign. It is broadly focused. It's focused on child development. It's focused on developmental milestones, and then early warning signs of delay, regardless of what that delay may be indicating. The idea is we want to identify children early and get them into services as soon as possible. So I'm going to switch gears or go back a little bit and talk about child development. We know that babies start communicating when they're born. That, you know, we hear that babies can differentiate their mom or their dad's voice from other people. And this is key. This social emotional development is key to forming strong relationships and continued learning. So by 3 months, we know that children should have a smile. They should have a social smile. And we look in this picture and we can see this mom looking at her baby. She's delighted looking at her baby. The baby is smiling back at her. You can imagine there also might be some sounds going back and forth. There may be some cooing going back and forth at 3 months. There's early imitation going on. And we know imitation is the way children learn. So if children aren't imitating, then we need to try to encourage that, because imitation, as all of you know, when we're learning a new task, when we're doing a new job, we look for role models, we look for other people who can show us how to do that, and we learn by imitation, and children do that as well. So I apologize that my videos are not in my presentation, but I've had a lot of trouble with that, so I just play them separately. So I am going to show you a video now of some babies that have what we call sort of typical emotional tone, and then there's going to be some children that are showing us some risks for that.
All right, your tone is good.
Oops, sorry.
Tone is good. Yeah, so we're gonna have your lower extremity tone. We're gonna pick you up. See how you hold your head up a little bit. Beautiful. You wanna stand? Look at you there. And you're smiling for mommy. Okay, let's try it again.
Hold still around his fingers until we got a straight lock. When you go straight, and it does the same thing.
You are still a little like you're gonna fall off the table. So you're rolling over. You're putting your feet in your mouth before.
Okay, and now I'm going to show you some toddlers that are at risk. So even those children were much older, you know, we didn't see that change. Not only did we see that baby being happy, we saw that baby being sort of pensive or looking, what's that doctor going to do next when, you know, she was examining her. There were lots of different emotions that we saw in that baby very early that we didn't see in those children that I showed you at the end. And I'm going to show you videos throughout this talk that try to demonstrate the milestones and the different parts of development that I'm talking about. So by the end of 7 months, we know that babies are much more interactive. You've got much more of that back and forth. You know, they may be starting to babble, the mama, the dada, or it's coming soon. And again, they're sharing that back and forth. They're learning that conversation. And so the way to stimulate that in a child is, you know, to pay attention, to bring them into the dinner table and to be talking to them. And including them in the things that they do. They should be enjoying social play at this point in time. They should be delighted when new people come in the room. And so if they're not doing that, if there are no big smiles, if there aren't warm, joyful expressions, then that is a reason to be concerned. If they're not sharing sounds back and forth, if they're not maybe sticking their tongue out and then the mom sticks their tongue out and then they stick it out again, or if they're not playing with their brothers and sisters, that is a sign that, you know, we don't have a diagnosis yet. We've just got a risk factor. We just got a red flag that's coming up saying we need to watch this child a little more carefully and see how that development is going to progress. So by the end of 12 months, there are simple gestures. You know, I think the fun thing that we all try to get babies to do is to wave. Now we know that often babies don't wave when you tell them to wave. They'll be waving all the time. They'll know what waving is, but then, you know, when you say, can you wave bye-bye to dad when he's leaving, then they don't do that. But simple gestures, they're going to be pointing, saying mama and dada. They may have a single word by then, they may not. And they understand what the word no is. They may not follow that direction, but they will understand that no means that they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing. So the red flags, and I think these have been publicized a lot in The media is not answering to one's name when they're called. So if there's a child that's a couple of feet away from me that's with their back turned and I say, "Joey," then I would expect Joey to turn and look at me. And a child with an autism spectrum disorder may not do this. These are red flags that could be an indication of an autism spectrum disorder. They could be an indication of something else. Generally, the first thing that we do if we're concerned about a child's language development is test their hearing. Most babies now are tested at birth, but that doesn't mean that there couldn't be a progressive hearing loss that has happened over that first year and that there's some hearing problems. So that would be the first step that I usually recommend if a child is having problems with communication. I'm going to show you another video now that just illustrates that response to name. Sorry. Actually, I will come back to that because I didn't open it up when we restarted all of this. And now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about joint attention. And honestly, the best way to talk about joint attention is to see a video of that. Joint attention is something, for example, so if I'm with a child and we're walking outside and they see an airplane in the sky, they might point at the airplane. They're going to point at the airplane, draw my attention to that, and then look up at me. And so it's that way we communicate with our eyes and with our gestures that is joint attention. And so let me play you a video that illustrates that.
Okay, now look at the next box away. Can you show me how we can clean up? Yes? Clean up, clean up. Oh, cleaning. Oh, you're so good at cleaning up. So good at cleaning up. Yeah, should we put the other box away? Clean up, clean up. Good job. That's what. And something. Hey, good job. Yes. Yes.
So it's that 3-point gaze that we're talking about with the point. Okay. And so joint attention is key, and that is one of the, when you talk to researchers that are doing the early work on autism spectrum disorders, that is what they're finding is the earliest thing that they can notice that is different between typical children and children that may be at risk for an autism spectrum disorder is the lack of development of joint attention. And so in this picture again, we see the baby is pointing at the character in the book and telling her teacher about it. And that happens to be my Penelope, my now 3-year-old. So by 18 months, we know that children are doing a lot of simple pretend play. They're pointing to objects. They're wanting to show you things. They're wanting to involve you in their lives. And they're saying, look. They should have about 6 words by 18 months of age. And that is one of these red flags that we talk about. If a child doesn't have any words by 18 months of age, we're not making a prediction by one point in time, but we're saying this is a red flag. This is a reason why we need to figure out what's going on with communication, with that child's socialization, check their hearing, and then go from there. And I think this is one of the last videos I'm going to show you, but I think it's very really shows you the difference between 2 18-month-olds. What I'm going to show you is 2 18-month-olds. One 18-month-old has an autism spectrum disorder and one does not, and they're twins. So they've been brought up in the same home, they've had all the same, sort of interaction, and the difference between the two is really pretty dramatic. So I don't know if you can hear that, but she's saying push and he's imitating push. Uh-oh, looking back at his mom. And then I'm going to move this along and I'm going to show you side by side. So I do that to show you that, you know, we can see symptoms of autism spectrum disorders early. It's going to take, to diagnose a child at 18 months with an autism spectrum disorder is pretty early. And that's, most professionals are not going to do that on their own. I certainly would want input from other people if I'm going to be seeing a child in clinic that early and making a diagnosis. There are certainly some children, I think that the evidence is pretty clear, and others we're going to say, you know what, let's get some intervention going and let's see what happens. That is the key. You know, the diagnosis is not the key. What we are seeing is if we're seeing a child that is showing symptoms of developmental delay or showing symptoms where they're having problems with socialization, with communication, or with gross motor, fine motor skills, or their learning skills, what we want to do is get them into those early intervention systems as soon as possible so that the therapists that know this and the early educators that know how to work with children and intervene can get in there as soon as possible. And of course, when we get children into those systems of care, then we're hopefully supporting that family as well. Because I think what parents need is they need for us to help restore some of the hope in the future, you know, so that they can read, oh, the places you'll go, and they can think of that for their child. It's amazing how often I see children, and I'm generally seeing children under the age of 3. And I say to parents as I'm taking the medical history, I say, what's your child good at? And then I ask, what does your child like to do? And it's amazing that I have parents that are so worried about their child, they can't name anything their child is good at. And so we take that 5 or 10 minutes, and my goal is by the end of that clinic visit to find something that the parent can say, look, my child can accomplish this. My child can do this, because it's so important for that family to understand that their child isn't a group of milestones that they're not achieving, but they have things that they are achieving, and we can work on those and build on those and then work on the things that are not coming along as we'd expect. And the child is a whole person. And I know you all who work in these fields all the time understand that, but it's always good for me to hear it, so I hope it is for you as well. So by the end of by the end of 24 months, babies should be putting together, toddlers should be putting together 2 words. They should be saying drink milk, eat cookie, something like that. So they should have 2-word phrases. They're becoming more interested in children. They still may be sort of playing next to children as opposed to with children in that parallel play, but they are interested in their environment around them. They can point to objects in a book. They can point to body parts. And how do they learn their body parts? They learn that by imitation. So parents are playing with them, they say, where are your ears? They point to their ears, and then the child points to their ears. And over time, that's a skill that children learn. So red flags, again, would be the opposite of that. So no 2-word meaningful phrases at 24 months, and not being interested in other children. We really would expect by this point in time that children are wanting that interaction. By the end of 3 years, that is just increasing. So the make-believe play is getting more complicated. We've got 2 little girls who are being princesses. The 3-year-olds like to help everybody around the house. They want to clean everything. You know, my 3-year-old said, I'm going to clean the bathroom. And I went in there and she had a little sponge and she was cleaning all of the sink and the bathtub and everything. She wanted to show that she could do the things that the big people in our house could do. So by 3 years, you're just seeing sort of a continuation of that development. And again, by 4 years. Again, so you've gone from doing one-step commands in the second part of, so it's sort of around 12 to 18 months, and then by 4 years, or by 48 months, 3-step commands. Now when I'm testing a 3-step command, I have to make sure it's not a routine. So it's not something you're used to doing every day. It's not something like put on your shoes and go outside and get the mail or something like that. To test whether a child can do that, it has to be a unique set of commands that they wouldn't normally do, so that it's not something that they've learned as a routine, such as take this piece of paper, put it under the table, give the toy to mom, or something like that. And so you're supposed to be, by this age, seeing more cooperation with other children. And so what I'm going to play you now is a sequence of just different reading over time, and you could substitute other skills in here. You could substitute make-believe play. You could substitute other things, and what development is something that occurs over time, and they build on the skills they've learned before. That's why I showed you that imitation, we're looking for imitation coming in really, really early. That baby that we showed you was 5 or 6 months old. We're looking for joint attention coming in early in that end of the first year of life. And so this reading is just here is an example of how we can track development over time. And it also reminds me to tell everybody, you know, parents say, well, what can I do? What can I do before I get services started? Or what can I do with my typical child to stimulate development? And I always say, just talk to them. Talk to them, read them. If you don't have books in your house, then use a magazine. You know, use whatever you have to read and to talk about the pictures that are there. If you can't read yourself, then you can make up the stories. You know, the importance is, reading is a great way to share development with your child. So this first little girl, can you all hear that? Oops.
Can you read it for me? Can you read the story?
This child's about 18 months old. She looks back at her teacher. She's looking at the pictures. We're going to see her point to a picture. She's imitated Humpty Dumpty and pointed.
Yeah. Is it a bunny or a squirrel? He's already in?
Much more spontaneous in his language, sharing what he's seeing, pointing a lot at the things he's seeing.
Red, fish, blue fish.
Looking for an okay from his teacher.
Black fish. Blue fish. One fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish. Black fish, two fish, four fish, two fish. This one has a little star. This one has a little car. Say, of fish there are.
So what what we can see is we can see that development of reading over time. And they're checking back with their teacher to make sure they're doing a good job, getting that praise to keep going on. So that is just one example about how we can look at development, a developmental skill that moves over time. Oops. So what do we tell parents to do if they are concerned about their child's development? Well, the American Academy of Pediatrics has put out a number of different guidelines, and they ask primary care physicians to screen children on a regular basis. So they have two things. One thing is they call it developmental surveillance, and that's the stuff we've been talking about for the last 30 minutes or so. It's just observing children, observing how children play, learn, speak, and act, and picking up on red flags, looking at development. And then at the same time, the AAP recommends that children have a standardized developmental screen at certain ages. So they recommend that for a general developmental screen, children are screened at 9 months, 18 months, and 24 or 30 months. The reason that 24 or 30 months is in there is because a lot of insurance companies didn't traditionally pay for a 2.5-year-old visit or the 30-month visit. That seems to be changing, and it's a way to check in with that family at 2.5, and so is really a good time to have another well-child visit. Then autism screening at 18 and 24 months, again with a standardized screen. So the idea is that you're monitoring development as children are coming into well-child care, and maybe for their sick visits, but also then having some times when you do standardized screening with a tool. I'm not going to talk a lot about tools, but I can certainly give you some resources if you're interested in that. The most commonly used general developmental tools right now are the PEDS and the ages and stages. There's also the POINT is one that has been coming out that people have started using. And then for autism, the one that's used the most right now is something called the MCHAT. There are some other autism screening tools that are sort of in their end stages of development and will be available fairly soon. So we can talk about that a little more if that is an interest to you. This is a slide to remind me to say that if a child loses speech or babbling or social skills at any age, at any time, then that is a reason for concern and to direct a child to their doctor, or direct a family to go talk to the doctor. Children should never lose skills. So children may, when they're sick, they may not do they may not be as energetic, they may not be interacting as much as you're used to, but that should be short-lived. So if a child has a cold or or the flu or something like that, they may not be the same, they may not be as interactive as they are typically, but that's only going to be a couple days. If a child loses skills, that is a reason for concern because there may be something progressive that's going on. And generally at developmental centers, so if we get a call from a family that a child is losing skills, we're going to sort of move them to the top of the list and get them in because we've got to figure out what's going. Why is the child losing skills? Now, in reference to that, there's also this thing that happens, and it seems to happen quite a bit with autism spectrum disorders, is that children will have something that we call plateauing. So it's not that they're losing skills, but they're not gaining new skills. So they may have a couple words, and then they don't gain any more. And it's sometimes perceived by a lot of parents that the child is losing skills. And the reason why is because they're used to their child learning new things every day, and suddenly they're not learning those new things. And so that plateauing seems to occur particularly in children with autism spectrum disorder, or some children with autism spectrum disorders. So, like I said, what do we do? Well, if it's the first thing to do is to do some sort of developmental screen. There are a lot of child care centers that are now doing this. There are some recommendations for Head Start, early Head Start, to be doing developmental screening. So there are many different places that a child might be screened with a standardized tool. If there is a concern, we say, the child, if it's not being done by the child's pediatrician or primary care provider, then refer them back to their primary care provider. I know that many of you are working in areas that are focusing on the medical home. So the idea is to get that child back to their medical home and move things along. Also, you know, sometimes parents also do a self-referral to the early intervention system, to the Part C program. Sometimes that is done by the primary care provider. What all this takes is a conversation, and what we find when we hear from parents is that a lot of parents say, you know, I was really worried about my child. I took them to see my pediatrician, and my pediatrician said, just wait and see. And you know, what we're trying to do is we're trying to address this on a number of different levels. You know, parents need to feel empowered. Parents need to follow their gut. They know their child. They have been with their child, you know, since they're born, or if usually, or if the child's been adopted, then from whenever they came into their home. But that is their child, and they have a gut feeling that something's wrong. And we tell parents, you know, keep with that. You know, if someone says wait and see, and that doesn't seem right, ask some more questions. Ask, you know, find some more resources. And also what we're trying to do then from our end of things is educate primary care physicians about the importance of early identification and early intervention. So I spend a good deal of my time working on talking to healthcare professional groups about the importance of early intervention. In some cases, a child will also be referred to a developmental specialist for an evaluation and diagnosis. The specialists, you know, might be a neurologist, they might be a developmental pediatrician, might be a psychiatrist, might be a psychologist. Most children with autism spectrum disorders, when we look back at our data, are actually diagnosed by psychologists. And I say this, and I'm sure there are people out there saying, yeah, but we can't get them in to see someone for a year. And you know, I know I was talking last night to someone who says, you know, we've been trying to find a neurologist to come to Montana for the last 6 months. And there is definitely not enough people working in this area. There's a shortage all over the country to find these developmental specialists. But the important thing is that yes, we need to do a medical workup for a lot of these children to figure out if there is a risk factor or a cause or that kind of thing. We also need to get them into early intervention services. What makes me really sad is I saw a child last week who was 5. And this child had an intellectual disability. This was the first time that they were hearing that someone could have intervened and helped their child. He was 5. He had missed any chance at getting into early intervention, early childhood special education. He hadn't received anything from there. And this family in particular had had another child that had had an IEP in school. So she had been, the mother had been linked in with that system, but something had happened, and it didn't translate into getting services for this child. And you know that, and when I said, well, so why didn't you know, what happened? Why didn't you get any services earlier? Well, my doctor said that you needed to come see me first, and it was really you know, disappointing to me, because that's not the message that I want parents to be getting. I can help with diagnosis, but I don't do the intervention. There are experts in the field that are doing this every day, and that's what we need to get kids to those places, and then we'll work on the diagnosis as we can. And of course, and I think I've said this a number of times, getting the other importance for that early intervention is to support that child and family, because we need to restore hope, the hope in these parents and this child, so that the child is going to reach their full potential. I think you all are familiar with the early intervention program, Part C. I don't know, do we have anyone that works in Part C that's here today? So we have one person, and so there's our resource over there, so a couple people. So Part C is mandated through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It is generally a home-based service where children are evaluated in their home on those different developmental domains that I talked to you about. And then there are therapists who then can provide services specific to the needs of the child. Again, it's not supposed to be diagnosis specific, so the children should be getting services based on their needs and based on the symptoms that they're showing, as opposed to a medical diagnosis. I am actually not sure in Montana at the cost of that. Some states are adding some sliding scale to some of their services because of the economic problems that states are having. And the services do vary from state to state, but it's a really important resource to know about. And then, of course, for intervention for children older than that, again, through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, there's early childhood special education services for children starting from 3 to 5, and then they move into the school district. And there should be a transition between the Part C program and the early childhood special education system. So there should be some help for parents when their childs are transitioning between those two programs. Again, I said it's based on need, not based on diagnosis. That changes a bit when you get into the school system, because they do need to put an eligibility a diagnosis for children. Often at this age, what I see a lot is significant developmental delay. Sometimes an autism spectrum disorder or autism eligibility will be used if a child has autism. So there are, I've talked about those resources. And now I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing with the Learn the Signs Act Early campaign. So we have a number of different things we're doing. We have a traditional health communication campaign. I think a lot of you have our purple pens that have the website on there. The website has information about developmental milestones. It has resources for parents. It has resources for child care providers. And it has an interactive child development checklist on there, which you can go in and you can put your child's age in there and then click off milestones that a child is meeting or not meeting. And what I like to do is encourage child care providers, for example, to use this. If they're concerned about a child, they can go through this and they can use this paper as a conversation piece with a family. And it also gives that family something they can then take to their doctor to talk about. Having that piece of paper that's got some sort of evidence on there, some milestones that a child's meeting or not meeting, you know, can be helpful rather than just saying, I'm concerned about my child. Maybe if you go in with a piece of paper that has some milestones on there, then that can help with what you're saying. And obviously, as part of this health communication campaign, we do presentations, we go to exhibits at conferences to use this information. All of these materials are in English and Spanish. We are working with the Indian Head Start program to create some materials that are more in line with the culture. And so there are things that we're doing to sort of focus on different populations. We're also working on some things to do some capacity building in states, partner engagement, and then evaluating the programs we do. So our campaign objectives are to increase the awareness of developmental milestones, increase this knowledge of early action that we've been talking about, increase parent-provider dialogue, and then early action for all childhood developmental disorders. We focus on, so the materials are designed for parents. These milestones that are in there are are from the American Academy of Pediatrics, and then we use early educators and healthcare professionals to get this information out to parents. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk to you about what we're doing as far as Act Early projects. We have been hosting Act Early regional summits in different regions and of the country, and what we do is we bring together about 15 people in a state to try to figure out how things are going to work in their state to improve that time or decrease that time from identification of a child with a concern and getting them to services. This is a partnership with the Maternal Child Health Bureau, and that partnership is actually what brought me here, because in that we are trying to, there's a lot of federal legislation that is paying for autism-related activities, and there are two things that all of the federal agencies are doing. The one thing is that we say, you know, there are children, not all children with developmental problems have autism, so we need to focus on not just autism spectrum disorders, but all those other things that affect children early on. And so when we discuss these topics, we're not trying to create a separate system for autism necessarily, but we're trying to improve that network and that capacity build to improve services for all children that are in need of early intervention. So we have hosted these summits, and actually Montana was not involved in their regional summit, the Region 8 summit, because my understanding was the legislature meets every 2 years, and they were meeting at just starting to meet at the same time. So Montana will be included in one of the later summits, but they're not going to be included with their regional summit that already happened. And so these stakeholders that come are representatives of healthcare, education, public health, parents, advocates. Sometimes we have legislators there. And the University Center on Excellence in Developmental Disabilities is the host. So they're the people who sort of help decide who's going to be in these teams. Sometimes some of the child advocacy or child maltreatment people are there. Sometimes people are from Child Care Bureau. It depends on the state, and we don't tell them what they need to do. What we want to do is bring people together. We know it's those relationships that count in improving services for children. And it's amazing. I mean, sometimes I talk to people and they said, yeah, we had to come 400 miles to this summit, but the person that I just met works down the street from me, and I've never met him, and we're trying to do the same thing for kids. And I think that happens over and over again. We're all out there doing things to try to improve the lives of these young children that are having developmental concerns, and sometimes we don't know who else in our region is working on that too. And so the idea is that this allows people for a day and a half to come together and come up with some concrete activities and concrete plans to move forward. So I've said most of this. You know, we want to understand the opportunities and the challenges. What we have also done is we're trying to put the information on a website so that people can find out what other states are doing. It's not quite developed yet, but as it does, I'll get back in touch with Roger and let him know, and he can send that information out to you, because sometimes, you know, what's happening in these summits is not only are the state members talking to each other, but they find out what someone's doing in another state, and they say, oh, well, we could maybe try that, and maybe that would work for us. So we do encourage people to use our materials, and some states have used our materials, and then we've been able to put their local information on there, and we can help people to do that. Because we want this Learn the Signs, Act Early message to be something that people use to get to parents and to get children into services that they need. The state teams are continuing to meet, and what a lot of the states have done is they've gone back home and realized they need to expand their membership. And so they've invited more people to it, and they're collaborating with other people. And we're able, you know, I'm sure many of you have gone to meetings where you meet for 2 days, and then you all go home, and the meeting was great, and then there's no plan to follow up. And so I said, you know, if we're going to go into this project, we're not going to do that. There's going to have to be some support on the other end. So we have many grants that then support people to keep meeting, so I think that hopefully is helpful, because there's a lot of good work that is done and a lot of good thinking, and we don't want to lose that. We're also funding a few different research topics of interest. One is being done in Wisconsin and one is being done in Oklahoma, and they are looking particularly at family practice and how family practitioners or family medicine doctors are doing developmental screening and what the barriers are there. And I know that that is something in rural states and in frontier states where they are seeing, family physicians see the majority of young children, and there seem to be different barriers for pediatricians than there are for family physicians as far as developmental screening. So we funded some people at University of Oklahoma and University of Wisconsin to try to figure out what's going on and give us a model that we can then suggest to people and maybe replicate. The other things that I get to work on, or I get to do, it's a mentorship program, and there are 2 projects that will be done by the end of December. One is looking at how we can take positive parenting, so those things that you learn, parenting skills and things like that, and incorporating milestones into the programs at the CDC that focus on positive parenting. And then the second one is focus very specifically on speech pathologists, because speech pathologists often are the first children, or the first allied health professionals who see children with speech delay who may end up having an autism spectrum disorder. And so they enter into the system, and we want to figure out how to help allied health, help speech pathologists, help families navigate that system to a diagnosis. And so I'm working with a speech pathologist in South Carolina who is going to be doing some national work and then some focus groups, trying to figure out how we can use those therapists, those people that are already involved in this child's life, to help refine diagnosis. Talked a little bit about partnership. You know, this isn't something that we can do alone. So that's why, you know, when I was invited to come to Montana, I said, sure, I'd love to come, because it's you all that can be partners with us in identifying children and getting them into services as soon as possible. We partner with the American Academy of Pediatrics. We partner with some of the autism advocacy groups, with some of the disability groups, and then most importantly with HRSA and the Maternal Child Health Bureau, because we have this huge responsibility to follow the combating autism legislation, and we want to make sure that we're not duplicating things that we're doing, and we want to make sure that this is getting back to states, because you guys are the people that are really working with these families, supporting these families, and so hopefully through our partnership with MCHB, we can move the dial for these families and move it forward. I am going to share with you now one more video that sort of summarizes everything that I hope I have told you today. It's about 4 minutes long, so it's a little bit long, but hopefully it will keep you engaged.
CDC presents Health Matters.
In the U.S., nearly 17% of all children experience some form of developmental or behavioral disability. Recognizing a problem early for disabilities such as autism is key for parents and healthcare providers across the nation. To help children with potential problems reach a healthier future, CDC realized the impact of developmental disabilities and invested in a campaign known as Learn the Signs, Act Early. The program aims to help parents measure their child's progress in terms of milestones that monitor more than just the physical. Parents can gauge how their child develops by how they play, learn, speak, and act.
When a parent is worried that a child may have a developmental problem, there are a number of things they can do. They should talk to their child's doctor, contact the early intervention agency if their child is under the age of 3, or contact the local school district if their child is over the age of 3.
The good news is the earlier parents and providers recognize children that are delayed in reaching a milestone, the more intervention may help them to reach their full potential. All children develop at their own pace, and many reach particular milestones slightly late or early.
A parent may notice that a child is not acting like the other children in their playgroup. What's the kid say? The child is speaking later than their brother spoke. This is a time when a parent should go to their child's doctor.
The age that a child takes a first step, smiles for the first time, and waves bye-bye offers important clues. A delay occurs when a child reaches a milestone at an age later than the average developmental rate. By 8 months old, a majority of children turn their heads upon hearing their name, smile back when someone smiles, and enjoy playing games like peekaboo. 18-month-olds can engage in simple pretend play, point to an interesting object, or speak in single words without prompting. By their second birthday, many children speak in 2 to 4-word phrases,
Where's the baby's nose?
follow simple instructions, and point to objects or pictures when named.
Keeping track of how she plays, learns, speaks, and acts is really important. Those are the things that you can do as a mom to learn those early signs of child development. Follow your gut, you're the expert in your baby, and you can make a difference by letting her doctor know if you're worried about something that's going on.
Cindy Gray noticed her daughter Catherine reached some milestones late.
Even though other people were telling me that Catherine was fine, it was just that she was premature and very small, I had a feeling it was something more than that.
Cindy Gray acted early.
Acting early and seeing the signs that something wasn't right with her, and then taking those steps to find out what it was, even though that's really hard to do, made all the difference for her.
To detect a problem early, connect early with your child and observe how they play, learn, speak, and act.
We were so grateful that Catherine was diagnosed when she was, because it allowed us to immediately get her the help that she needed.
If you suspect a problem, act early. If your child's development seems to slow down or your child loses skills, seek a doctor's advice immediately. Most of the time, a developmental problem is not something children grow out of on their own, but with help, these children can reach their full potential.
Okay, so now I'm going to take a few questions, and then I just have a few words of conclusion at the end of that. I don't know, how are we doing for time? Okay, okay. So if there are any questions? Mm-hmm.
I noticed at the very end when the lady was talking about the premature baby, and I was wondering how do they engage those developmental delays on pre-baby, because I have a granddaughter that's 2 months, was 2 months early.
Okay, so let me repeat the question for people. So the question was about how do we how do we take prematurity into account when we're looking at development? And honestly, what I need to tell you is that there's sort of some controversy about sort of when you do that. And that it is dependent a lot of times on where there might be an area of delay. Generally, we expect that children should sort of catch up with those social and those language skills by about 12 months of age, and so, but some of the other things, sort of the nutrition, motor skills, about 24 months of age. There is going to be some variability in that, but that's generally what I use for a guide. Any other questions? Okay.
I don't know if it's a question or not, but the thing that I just wanted you to comment on it, because when you were comparing those babies, and I'm sure a lot of you might have noticed that as well, but to me it was like a classic attachment bonding child who has some kind of history with the interaction with the caregiver. So I was wondering if you could just address that a little bit.
Sure. So the question is, when I was showing those videos of the twins, and one, they stated had an autism spectrum disorder, and one was typically developing. Was that a question of attachment? Was that? And I think the quick answer is we can't make a diagnosis from seeing a child for 30 seconds on a film. And I trust in the diagnosis that was made on that child based on the people that made it. But yeah, I mean, there are other things. We can't assume that every child that's not interacting appropriately with their parent or is having socialization problems, communication problems, has an autism spectrum disorder. Absolutely, we've got to take into account what's going on in their medical history, what's gone on in their family life, and you know, look at every individual child. So yeah, my point in using these videos is not to say, look, we can show a video for 10 seconds and you can decide whether a child has autism or not. Because even we had a presenter that came that has been studying early diagnosis and sort of those early warning signs of autism for 20 years, and she says, you know, sometimes I still see children, you know, I can't do that. I can't see a child for 10 seconds and tell you whether they've got autism or not. Does that answer your question or sort of come?
Yeah, I just wanted you to kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. So that, yeah, and if I hadn't made that point, absolutely. You know, children, that's what makes this complicated is a lot of times, or that's what makes it take a long time to get diagnoses, is a lot of times it takes a number of professionals to figure out what's going on with a child.
So I've heard that theory that this shows up at 18 months to 2 years. Is that, do you suspect that's true, or is it because we have been looking for these signs earlier on?
So the question is, you know, does autism generally show up between the ages of 18 months and 24 months? There are people that are studying siblings of children with autism. So we know that those siblings of children with autism are at greater risk for an autism spectrum disorder because of the genetic susceptibility that is part of the risk factors for autism. And so some of those researchers are saying, you know, we can see differences in some of these children much, much earlier. So it didn't just suddenly show up at 18 months, but there were clues in retrospect that, you know, made us think that socialization and communication wasn't developing in the same way. Could they make a diagnosis at 6 months? Absolutely not. But, you know, there may have been symptoms when they look back. There's been some studies that look at first-year birthdays. So they've taken videos, home videos of a first-year birthday, and tried to look at things that are going on in that videotape and predict from that videotape, you know, is this a child that would go on to develop symptoms of autism or not? And the results on that are sort of variable. So the answer to that, I guess, is that there are probably signs earlier in a lot of these children. Regression, so when we hear about regression, which is that losing skills that parents describe, we think that's only happening in if you go back and look at medical records and talk to parents, it probably happens in about 25% of cases where you actually see a regression. So most of the time it's not that children are losing skills, but that they sort of reach that plateau and they don't continue to gain skills. And 18 months is that time when we're looking for that. You know, we're looking for language to come in, and it didn't, you know, there's none of those single words. I have done a little bit of reading looking at different cultures, and actually in different cultures those symptoms are different. So the things that parents pick up on are different. For example, one of the studies I was reading was talking about Indian families, so in Asia, and they were talking about how they really pick up on sort of the social skills much earlier than the language, because the social skills are really important. So the following the social norms of that culture is what they pick up on first, as opposed to language. Whereas we might interpret some of the symptoms that we're seeing as, you know, independence. So that child is just really independent, whereas independence is not necessarily something in some people in that culture that is valued. Does that make sense? So really, you know, when we're picking up on different symptoms, it may be different from culture to culture, from family to family, of what things are noticed. If you have an interest in reading more about sort of the cultural parts of autism, Roy Grinker wrote a book called Unstrange Minds. He's an anthropologist at George Washington University, has a child with autism, and his wife is Korean. And it's a really fascinating book talking about autism in different countries, and then autism also over time, so from 1900s to today. Any other questions? Yep.
What are some of the risk factors that you identify?
So the question was, what are the risk factors for an autism spectrum disorder? We know there's a big genetic component to that. You know, there are some theories that there may be an environmental trigger that triggers that. So that means, you know, you have a susceptibility to the autism spectrum disorder. Maybe there's something else that happens, whether that is before the baby is born or after. We really don't know. One of the studies that we have undergoing at the CDC is called the SEED study, which is the study to explore early development. What they're doing is they're taking 2,700 children and dividing them into 3 groups. There's a group of children with autism, a group of children with a neurodevelopmental disorder that's not autism, and a group of typical children. And what they're doing is they're going to interview the families. They're going to take blood samples. They're going to take hair samples. They're going to look at a variety of different things, such as hormonal factors. They're going to look at different things in the blood. They're going to try to figure out this risk factor idea of what is going on. But certainly genetics plays a role in that. So we know that if you have one child with autism, then your risk of having a second child with autism is about 10%. And then if you have 2, it's about 25%. So.
Have they looked at possible food allergies? My child's 15 months, and 3 months ago we found out he had eggs, milk, soy, and peanuts.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, as soon as we started table food, I feel like he probably would have said that no.
Yeah, so there is some looking at in this study, and then there's also a big study called the CHARGE study out in California that is looking at things. So this was asking about immunological or allergy-related things, and so yeah, those are some other things that are being investigated. Yeah, in the green.
I am currently working with a family that has a 4-year-old autistic child and a 2-year-old that we strongly suspect has autism. She's been evaluated by a Part C program in Missoula and did not receive a diagnosis of autism, although, the things I see on the agency status, including one chat with her, also is that she has excursion, she has very poor social interaction, she doesn't have that real attention that you were mentioning. She's very speech delayed, although she is improving.
Mm-hmm.
She has 2 group combinations, just a few of them, like 2 different ones even there. But anyway, the mother's frustration is with the Part C program, she feels that they're inadequately trained in both diagnosis and early intervention. She's not really unhappy with the early intervention that she's receiving for the 4-year-old child. So my question, maybe Joanne can answer this, is how are the Part C people being trained in diagnosis and early intervention? And, I'd really like to see this mother's concerns be addressed. I do feel that her 2-year-old is showing early warning signs of autism.
So
What she wants you to do is try to get her a second opinion and another evaluation. And so far, I have not been able to find anyone else who can do a second evaluation.
So it's hard for me to comment sort of on an individual child, but what I can tell you is that generally Part C programs are not the place where children get diagnoses. So generally it is, the medical diagnosis is done, and I may be wrong, maybe, are you, oh, I thought you were going to, because you're from early intervention, right?
No, well, actually I'm offering a phone number.
Excellent. Okay, excellent. So, well, we'll get you the microphone and we'll get that so that everyone can hear that. But so the question is, how do we train Part C providers, or how do we train people that are, in that early childhood realm about autism? And there's a number of things that are being done nationally that hopefully will then will improve the knowledge of providers. the education department's Office of Special Education is sponsoring this thing called the National Professional Development Center, and what they're putting together is it's at the Frank Porter Graham Center in North Carolina, and they are coming together with the best practices for children at different ages, and so they are reviewing all the literature and they're trying to provide that. And then their second step in that is they're supposed to be doing professional development for teachers and early educators about this. And then there's a group called Ocali, which is in Ohio, and they have a lot of internet-based modules that people can download. It's OCALI. They have been working in conjunction with this National Professional Development Center to provide some more services. So I think the thing is that all of these systems are being there are a lot of children that are needing services, or a lot of children that have a lot of needs, and so we've got to figure out how to do what we can with the resources we have. And one of the ways is for us to find the experts in our state and to work together to improve the services that children can get overall. I'm going to take one more question and then just finish up.
I've got 2 here.
Okay, 2, and then, okay, that's fine, that's fine.
I work with early intervention, and I guess I wanted to just make a comment. Something that you had said earlier in your presentation I loved, and that was on continually monitoring the progress, and that if someone does not make a diagnosis early, to keep your response to interventions, document, video clips, and continue and move forward, because the professionals that are making these diagnoses, they may not have all the information, but that's where we come in as advocates for early childhood. And sometimes our Part C or our school districts get tired of hearing from our Head Start, but it's that consistent. And that's what they need. They need that documentation, and to go with what the parent is saying, listen to what the professional's saying, but also don't give up. Continue to monitor, continue to document, continue to inquire and question. Eventually they get tired of your questioning and they will seek further resources for you. But that happens sometimes.
Well, and I'd like to just echo that. I mean, I love, if I'm seeing a child and I'm asked to make a diagnosis, if I can have an early intervention provider there that is telling me how the child has been doing with their therapies, or if the parent can bring me observations that a child care provider has made, or someone from Early Head Start or Head Start has made, that is such, I'm only seeing a child maybe for an hour or 2, and these are people that are spending far more hours with children, and of course the families with them all the time, and so it's important for me to get as much information as I can. So you all that are working with children in different venues, your observations are so important. Looking at the way the child plays, learns, speaks, and acts is really important, because that only adds to what we can do. The diagnosis is sort of a starting point. Then there's the rest of the life, right? I mean, so we need to, and it's not, I guess starting point's the wrong word to use, but we are only a little blip in time when I'm seeing a child and making a diagnosis. What that child needs is family support. What that child needs is appropriate intervention services so that they can continue to make strides and reach their full potential. So I think we had one more resource, a phone number.
A resource for you. If you live east of Billings, the Developmental Education Assistance Program, that's 9 counties in eastern Montana, they will come to someone's home and make an initial diagnosis for like a Part C program, and then if it's warranted, they'll set you up with an EMD screening, which is all of the physician, occupational therapists, physical therapists, and that. The number is 800-224-6034, and that's anywhere east of Billings.
So it was 800-224-6034.
6034.
6034. So in conclusion, I wanted to just sort of, I think I've said this a million times, but what we're focused on is learning the signs of early development, learning the early warning signs of delay, and then acting early. And acting early is different for the different people that are involved in that child's life. They're acting early by identifying early, acting early by being intervention, acting early by offering family support. And so I just wanted to thank you. I wanted to thank you for your attention. I wanted to thank my family because they support me in coming out and talking to you all. And so this is my wonderful family and supportive husband who takes care of the house and takes care of everything that's going on when I get on a plane and fly to Billings, Montana. So thank you for your attention, and it was great to be here.
Well, I really thank you for coming. I did want to do a couple of other things before. I have a couple of announcements, big surprise. But I wanted you to know that Dr. Peacock's visit up here was supported in part by Pluck and Roger Holt. And I don't know if you've met Roger. He's back there. Wave again. Okay, looking, okay. And Pluck is a resource for you to use and to identify some resources for your families and communities. As one of our questioners or one of the people that made a comment, we do use ages and stages in a lot of the health departments around. One of the things I do want to encourage, and I think you probably already said this, is really being sure that you're working with the physician providers or your providers in the community. Because sometimes I think, we think we can do everything, but we really need to be sure we're using our providers. As you probably know from Roger, we don't have very many developmental pediatricians.
Right.
So it's hard sometimes getting to people where they need to be. So, but using those resources. And Roger, did you have anything you want to say? No, he's just waving again. Okay. But and I'm sure that you folks know about Pluck and can find them. But using those kind of resources to work with these kids and recognizing that we can't do everything. Before we get any further, I do have to make a couple of announcements about the day. There's a surprise. But we're also going to provide you with a couple of books. This one is from, it's called a Montana Table. It's recipes from the Chico Hot Springs that's nearby.
Oh, wow.
And this other one your kids might like.
Okay.
Because this is the first dog, the Jag. Okay. And it's signed not by Jag. It was signed, did we get it signed actually by the Gov? Oh, there you go.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you very much.
There you go.
Thank you very much.